Knob Mine, located in the Peak Creek area of Ashe, was host to several mining operations from the late 1800s to the mid-1900s. In 1962, the mine was finally shut down, having largely exhausted its supply of copper. But nearly 20 years later, the mine would be repurposed by two Buncombe County men named Allen Hathaway and Gary Miller.
Hathaway was a hitman for the Outlaw Motorcycle Club. He actually killed people for them. And Miller was just a drug dealer that hung out with Hathaway.
So, what were a couple of criminals from Asheville doing in Ashe County? Evidently, visiting a friend named Paul Bear.
Paul Bear was from Ashe County. He lived on Little Peak Creek. And he'd run moonshine sometimes, and he had a reputation for being rough, but he also, a lot of people said he was a good neighbor. He was a good mechanic and helped his neighbors out. And so, actually, I guess he had two sides to him.
The motorcycle gang had learned that there was a hole in the ground up here that the Ore Knob mine people had very nicely left us. And people in the county have told me that it was a place that had been used for years as a dump. So people would take old refrigerators and old cars and dead cows and whatever and throw in this hole, and it would go 200 feet down and never be heard from again. And so there was a heap at the bottom of trash and junk and stuff that people had thrown in this hole. And because Paul Bear was an Ashe County resident at the time, he knew about it, and other people knew about it. And this motorcycle gang decided that it was a convenient place to dispose of excess head count.
On December 12, 1981, Hathaway and Miller kidnapped Tom Forrester and his girlfriend Darlene Callahan from their Asheville motel room after Hathaway had found Forrester had stolen his motorcycle. Hathaway and Miller brought the couple up the mountain to Ashe County, where Paul Bear escorted them to Ore Knob Mine. For Tom and Darlene, time had run out. Hathaway and Miller returned to Asheville. 2 weeks later, on Christmas Eve, they, along with a third man named Joseph Vines, kidnapped another victim, Lonnie Gamboa. With Gamboa tied up in the trunk, they returned to Ashe County and paid Bear another visit.
I took him to Paul Bear's garage. And Gamboa was actually chained to a tree behind Paul's house, or garage down there up in the woods, for 6 hours. And I mean, it was like below, it was in single digits, it was so cold. And then they drove him to the mine.
Little did they know that Vines had a secret.
But Vines thought for sure he was going into that mine, because nobody knew he was an informant.
Hathaway and Miller didn't completely trust Vines, who they'd only known for a few days. And because he was new to the group, Vines was forced to push Gamboa into the mine shaft.
And he always claimed that he did this only under duress, that he was threatened and that he would have been shot and thrown in the hole if he didn't. And so he did what he had to do.
Vines had really been kind of hung out to dry. I mean, he had no backup, had no plans of escape, and it was either kill or be killed.
Trapped in an impossible situation, Vines knew he had to contact the authorities. He reached out to his contact at the ATF and told him what had happened. This information was then shared with the Ashe County Sheriff's Department. Based on this information, in January of 1982, the Ashe County Sheriff set out to search the Ore Knob mine shaft, but they were perplexed as to how to search a 200-foot deep hole. They tried to lower cameras down the shaft, but were unsuccessful. Their only option, dangerous as it was, would be to lower men down to the bottom of the mine.
And I remember reading in the paper at the time about this strange character who showed up on the doorstep wearing a ski mask. And he said, I'm a Hollywood stuntman. I'll go down and get him. I'm used to doing weird stuff like that. And so they said, well, what's your name? And he said, just call me the Nashville Flame. He said he didn't want his face seen, he didn't want his name known, because he was afraid the motorcycle gang would come and get him. But he volunteered to go down in the mine, so he and I think Gene Goss was the sheriff at the time, and one of his deputies went down on a crane that lowered him down into the hole.
The bodies of Tom Forrester and Lonnie Gamboa were quickly discovered, but Sheriff Gene Goss and the Nashville Flame continued to search. Goss knew Darlene Callahan had gone missing with her boyfriend and believed her to be in the mine as well, but had to call off the search before her body could be found. That same night, Paul Bear would be arrested by Ashe County sheriffs, and warrants were issued for the arrest of Hadaway and Miller. As Ashe County sheriffs began building a case, a surprising witness would come forward: the missing, presumed dead, Darlene Callahan. It turns out that she had not been thrown into the mine on that fateful night with Tom Forrester. Instead, she had been taken from the mine and sent to Chicago as a captive of the outlaw motorcycle gang. Only after Tom Forrester's body was retrieved from Ornob did she learn of his fate and reach out to authorities. She would ultimately prove to be a key witness for the prosecution, not only against Hadaway, Miller, and Bear, but also in an ongoing federal investigation of the Outlaws. Ultimately, all three men would be convicted for their role in the killings. Hadaway and Miller were given life sentences by a federal court judge in Chicago for their role in the kidnapping and imprisonment of Darlene Callahan, before being sent back to North Carolina, where they would plead guilty to the murders of Tom Forrester and Lonnie Gamboa. Paul Bear, however, stayed in Ashe County and stood trial in the Jefferson Courthouse.
There was a lot of evidence, and they even traced the gun that killed, or that Gamboa had when Gamboa was kidnapped. And Tommy Chapman traced the gun all the way back to Paul Bear's house. And that's the only way he could have got it.
The Ashe County jury found Paul Bear guilty of murder, and a life sentence was handed down. But in a somewhat surprising move, murder charges were also brought against Joseph Vines. While an Ashe County jury didn't return an indictment against him, a Buncombe County jury did find Vines guilty in the murder of Lonnie Gamboa.
Joseph Vines, the informer, he was sentenced to prison in Asheville. Now, they didn't sentence him in Laurel Spring and Jefferson. But when he went to Asheville, and they had the trial over there, then they sentenced him to 20 years in prison. And I went to interview him while he was in prison. He felt like that he had been treated very unfairly, because I had heard all along that they had promised him that he wouldn't be sentenced, for coming forward, and which they didn't in Ashe County. But and he said that some of them changed their story after they got to Asheville, and he really felt like that he had not been backed up by the people that was supposed to back him up.
Rose spoke with Joseph Vines on several occasions before he ultimately disappeared into witness protection.
Vines, he disappeared on me when the book came out again. I've heard rumors, that he's dead, but he told me, he said, I'll leave you my phone number and you can call me, but I'm moving and I don't want to give you my address. And I said, that's fine. And then the last time I called the phone number, it didn't work. But I told him, I said, if you'll let me know where you're at, I'll send you a book. And he said, I'll find a book.
With the case closed, the Ornob mine shaft was filled in. But could there still be more bodies in there? In her sworn statement, Darlene Callahan said Hadaway and Miller originally intended to take her and Forrester straight to Chicago, but then decided to take them to the other place instead, suggesting a familiarity with Ornob. Additionally, Joseph Vines tells a disturbing tale in his testimony and in an interview with Rose Haynes.
When they were, and Vines told me this, when they were at the mine and started to leave, Miller said, that makes 22, and Bear said, no, that makes 23. And Vines heard that himself. Well, Gene Goss said he went down in there, which he did, and helped bring the bodies up. And he said he was satisfied there was no more bodies down there. But the first body that was thrown in, Tom Foster, had been there for about 3 weeks, I guess, something like that. And the only reason they found it was because they saw a foot sticking out. And Gamboa had only been in there probably about 10, 12 days. And he was already froze to the ground. So, if there was anything under there. So, I don't know. Gene says he believes they were talking about more than one hole that they had, which could be possible. But Vines really believed that they were in that hole.
We may never know how many bodies were thrown into the Ore Knob mine because the mine was filled in shortly after the bodies were recovered. Nonetheless, people continue to speculate that more bodies were disposed of there. If you'd like to learn more about the details of this case, check out Rose Haynes' book, The Ore Knob Mine Murders.